Welcome to another episode of the OCOM Podcast, Modern Medical Education, where we bring in experts and we talk about different aspects of modern medical education in America. And today we actually have someone I've worked with for probably about 15 years, our Associate Dean for Student Services, Maddie Bindle. And, Maddie Bindle has been here for about 3 or 4 months, but she was actually part of the initial design of OCOM and had actually designed the entire Department of Student Services about 3 or 4 years ago. Went off to California Health Sciences and joined us a few months ago. And so anyway, Maddie, it's exciting to have you here at OCOM, and welcome to the podcast.
Wonderful. Thank you, Dr. Hasty. Happy to be here. And I know it took me a long way round to get back here, but I'm happy to be here as well.
So nice to have you here. Well, anyway, being the Associate Dean for Student Services, one of the things that always comes up is, what the heck is student services? And it encompasses so many things. And, maybe you could just kind of talk about, what that looks like.
Certainly. And, student services is different in many schools, right? But here, student services encompasses all the services that we provide our students. We provide, support through admissions. That comes within student services, financial aid, registrar, behavioral health, learning specialists, and the student affairs itself. So all of that encompasses the services that we provide to our students. It's not specific to anything. It's just me and I manage that group of people to help deliver the support to our students.
Excellent. Yeah, and they probably have the most experienced Associate Dean for Student Services in the country. At least I don't know of any others. You've actually taken 3 medical schools to full accreditation, and considered a national expert in so many things with student services. I know that you're a person that people go to for advice, for consultations, and you're even a COCA reviewer. So, which is, and for the people that, are not aware, COCA stands for the Commission on Osteopathic Colleges Accreditation, and they're our accrediting body. We're in pre-accreditation with COCA, and it's really special to be a reviewer for them. So I don't know, do you want to talk about that?
Certainly, but first of all, thank you for the kind words. I'm sure that more people out there better than me, but I appreciate your support. Being part of COCA has been an eye-opener for me and very important to me. I've been a COCA evaluator for, I'm going to say, since 2012. So I've been out there and visited and been fortunate to visit many, many schools in their accreditation process. And what that does for me is help me get to understand the best practices that are out there, and then bringing those best practices back to the osteopathic school to then say, hey, what do we need to do to change, but make sure that we're still meeting the requirements of what COCA is asking of us through the standards that they expect us to meet. So having that ability to learn what other people do. And the other thing it's brought to me, it's opened many doors for me too, and I've got to know many people. And as a result of that, I'm able to call upon other experts in the student services arena to say, hey, what would you do in this case? Because every day there's something new within student services that you think, wow, I've never come across that before. What do I do? So having the friendship of the people that you actually meet when you're out there on an accreditation visit has helped me enormously.
Yeah, excellent. Yeah, it's amazing the power of the network, right? Having the friends and having those relationships, means access to a lot of information and knowledge. I probably would not have said this 20 years ago, but I believe it in my life now, that the quality of each of our lives are dependent upon the quality of the relationships. And I also think that the quality of an organization is dependent upon the quality of the relationship of that organization. And again, back to your, point about the networking and the relationships, it means, so much. And, especially when you're a COCA evaluator, you have sort of a catbird seat and you kind of get to know people extremely well. Yeah.
That's true. And one of the reasons I became a COCA evaluator was when we were being evaluated ourselves, there was this inner sanctum, right? But it's like being in the military. You don't know anything that's happening in the military behind closed doors. And that's how it felt with COCA. So I thought I want to be behind that door and being able to learn a lot more about what other schools do and the whole process of accreditation. So it really helped me understand what needs to be done to deliver a good education, meeting the standards of what the high standards that COCA expects of us too. So that was the motivation behind becoming an evaluator, was because I wanted to be behind that door. So.
Wow, that's great. Well, they're lucky to have you and your experience and knowledge, on that. So, to me, the other interesting thing about student services is that it really follows a cycle. There's just, so many different aspects, and it seems like, different members of your team, are like sort of on deck at certain times of the year and stuff like that. So, I'd love for you to, just kind of talk about what your annual cycle looks like as a student services dean.
Oh, so true, Dr. Hasty. So true that there's this up and down cycle for all the departments within student services. Admissions being the long cycle, right? The application process opens in May for the following year, and the application process is open for the class of 2030, and we haven't even sat the class of 2029 yet. So, that's the cyclical cycle of admission. So, and certainly now this time of year when we're experiencing MELT, and everybody is experiencing MELT. And if you don't know what MELT is when somebody has committed to coming to you and then they get offered a seat at somewhere else and they decide to go somewhere else, and that there's a pattern to that, because we see that melt happening around April, May time, and then it starts to slow down. But that process, which gives me heartburn at this time of year, so that to fill the class, but that's really, melt is a big part of the admission cycle, and certainly towards the end of the cycle. And of course, the application process that runs, because as an osteopathic school, and most schools have that prolonged period of application cycle. So it does seem to go on forever, but it does have its ebbs and flows in the admission cycle. Of course, those applications come in, and everybody that applies early, they want to apply early, and the people that want to make sure they get their seat, and then you've got those other people that are procrastinators that might be taking a little bit more time towards the February, March time. So that's admissions. And then financial aid, again, supporting that is that now is the busy time for financial aid, right? When we know we've got 145 students that need to think about how are they going to pay for medical school. So that's a busy time now for people applying for loans, and us and the team sort of certifying all those loans that are coming through to pay for their education. And registrar is busy at different times of the year, right? Again, through exam time, especially at the end of the year, and whether certainly final exams and at the end of the first semester and the second semester, they're very busy at that time. And then student affairs, I think, is a constant. It's, supporting the students whilst they're here. And then behavioural health is a constant during that time. Behavioural health services that we provide our students. Does it get a little bit more stressful for students close to exam time? Absolutely. So they might be busy at that time. Then the learning specialists, certainly, when they're going through the assessment process and the stresses and strains of that too. So again, it's very cyclical, but the biggest one is admissions.
Yeah. Well, thank you for that. And it is interesting, the MELT. This year for the class of 2029, I think we interviewed well over 1,000 people for 145 seats, and we had actually accepted a number of those folks, and they, just like you said, melded. They deposited with us, which this year our deposit was only $100, which next year we're increasing our deposit, but I don't know if that will change things. But people walked away pretty quickly from a $100 deposit without even much consideration, I don't think, in some ways. And again, it's something we're hearing from all the different medical schools. It's kind of starts to feel a lot more like the undergraduate admissions, and where they actually have a ton of melt. Also, people they thought were coming, and then last minute they find out they weren't coming. It's really, really interesting. So you mentioned a couple things that probably Heck, if you would have told me 20 years ago we have learning specialists, yeah, I would have said, what the heck's a learning specialist, right? And then now, I'd say most medical schools, probably all medical schools, have learning specialists, or at least something that kind of feels like learning specialists. So, could you talk a little bit more about that? Yeah.
Certainly. Learning specialist really is about, when a student is not doing well academically, how do we support them? How do we give them that extra bit of techniques to learn better and to be able to approach their studies in a different way? Sometimes when a student is struggling academically, what is it? Why is a student struggling academically? Is it, one, because they've had to change the way that they learn? And it's very different in medical school. In undergraduates, it's a lot more about rote memorization and being able to regurgitate that information. In medical school, it's not so much that. How do you now apply yourself from the information that you have gained during the classes that you do right through our curriculum? So how are we going to support them to be able to do that transition from being an undergrad student to a graduate student? And that's very important. So what the technique that you have for anatomy may be different to the technique that you have for one of the courses, whether it's hem-onc or cardiology. How you learn is different in each one. So what our learning specialists do is try to understand, one, what are the objectives of that course is, and then what resources are available, and the approach to learning for that specific course. So a learning specialist can do that. A learning specialist can help with, you may have, and you may struggle to think about time management. Time management is huge in medical school. So we really want the students to be able to manage their time effectively when they are studying. So try to give some study methods that may be helpful to them and the way that they learn. And then test taking, I think that's another thing. Is how are you approaching your testing? Are you, how do you dissect the question that you are given within the exam, and then break that down to get to the right answer? So helping the student with all those aspects of their learning experience here. And then there are other times the learning specialist says, hey, it might not be anything to do with the way that you learn. It may be that you have some external factors that are causing you the anxiety when when you're taking your exam. And how do we then support that? And that anxiety can then be triggered. And I know you're going to go down this route, Dr. Haseen, that we have behavioral health support to be able to help with those kind of things as well, right? It's not always about the way that you learn. It might be those external factors, home life, the curveballs that medical school throws at you that may be affecting it. And so we're able to use that learning specialist and behavioral specialist support of each other to help the student.
Yeah. It's interesting to me because, things like, test anxiety, some of the challenges of becoming a physician, and let's face it, it's sort of peak academic performance, right? You have to be in the game, very well. I mean, going to medical school is not easy, and I don't care where you go to medical school. Every medical school, it's hard. If I went to Publix across the street, I think everybody walked in there. If I asked them if they thought medical school was hard, they would say it, right? It's something that sort of everybody kind of knows, from an academic standpoint, it's tough. But it's interesting to me that in the last, again, probably 15, 20 years, that, almost every medical school has learning specialists now, and they're using it. So, I wonder if part of it is just, the recognition, that folks need the support, and doing well. I also wonder if some of this could just be financially driven, that, that if we can decrease, attrition, that there's a business model, because let's face it, every time you save a first-year medical student, from, leaving or whatever, there's potential, tuition and things like that. Of course, it's cost to society and things like that by not having that physician. And so, I wonder what's been the biggest driver, because at the end of the day, I mean, some good portion of medical schools, tuition pays for, the learning specialist. It's either tuition or taxpayers, right, in most cases. And, we're consciously making the decisions that we need those support for medical students. So, yeah, I don't know. Do you have any thoughts about what's driven that? Yeah.
No, not really. I think that students, it's the, as you said, medical school is not easy at all. And it's the volume of work that you have to keep on top of that makes it hard, right? It's that pace, that assimilation of that information. And that, I think that's really driven it, right? And what I do see is that medical education hasn't taken anything away, right? It hasn't. What it's done. There's so much innovation out there now, and what people need to know. And I think that volume, that additional volume, has said, okay, how do we support the students? Because we're not taking any knowledge away. We're actually adding more. And, when students come and say, hey, we want to include this in the curriculum, we don't say, well, what do you want me to take out of the curriculum, right? We know that we still need to have that. Yeah, we do need to have that too. So we keep on adding to the knowledge that they have to have and the knowledge base. So I think being able to help them has driven the need for learning specialists because of that.
Yeah. And it's also kind of interesting to see if it has affected the attrition rates. I know on the osteopathic side, we, changed, if I recall, if I understand it correctly, changed how we actually collect and report out attrition rates. So I'm not quite sure if it has or has not, made a difference. And, at least on the osteopathic side, the LCME, I recently was looking at their stuff, and they had reported out pretty low attrition rates as well. So I don't know, again, if that's a reflection. Of course, there's a million moving pieces with attrition rates because people do modified course of studies. There's a 50-year track for many medical schools, and sometimes they put, modified course of studies for some of these learners. So it's trickier and trickier to figure out if that has made an effect. But I would think it has, though.
Yeah, but in general, as you said, though, attrition rates in medical school are low. They really are. You're not getting the big attrition that you would get at the undergraduate level. There's no doubt about that. And I think it's because also the selection process, every student that is here, we have confidence that they can get through to the curriculum, right? And we try to help those students and say, well, you deserve to be here. You're good enough to be here. Otherwise, we wouldn't have chosen them to be part of the institution. So what do we want to do? We want to keep them going and keep that dream alive for them. But also there has to be some attrition. I believe in that, not everybody is going to thrive in medical school. And it's okay to be able to for a student to turn around and say, this isn't for me. And we have to help this, if that's the case, we have to help the student make that decision, but in a way that they can have positivity to do something different.
Yeah, absolutely. And I tell folks, there are incredible careers out there outside of medicine. So, becoming a physician isn't right for every single person that steps foot in the medical school. Now, and of course, the goodness of, their desire to serve and everything went to medical school, was probably there. But, for whatever reason, it's just not the right fit for not 100% of people that walk through the doors, right?
Yeah. And having to recognize that is a tough decision for many students, right? But, if we are here to help them move forward, right? And if there is that little blip on the radar, how do we help them to become the physician that they want to be? But recognizing may not be for everybody.
Yeah, well said. Yeah, it's interesting. You were talking about, and of course the learning specialists, they do things like the Pomodoro method and helping them to, study, for their exams and, all those type of things and, opportunities to reduce test anxiety. And, and you mentioned, accessing the information, which is incredible, right? How much information. And it reminds me of a conversation I recently had with our librarian, Kelly Peter, or at least a little while ago, I guess it was, there was this trend that some medical schools, and it seemed like it was more on the, public medical school side of things, I guess they have the taxpayer money, right? But they would sort of have assistant librarians or whatever that would help a certain cohort of students, do some research, and the students would, give them, the objectives for their courses or whatever, and say, hey, can you, help me find materials or identify materials for that? Although I think nowadays with AI, our students are using the AI in so many different ways, right? You can take your objectives and say, hey, write me 5 questions for each of these objectives, and it'll instantly come back, or, give me, 3 evidence-based resources. In fact, I know some of our student leadership recently did a research topic about which of the LLMs are better for, some of these things, or it can, summarize, certain things. I mean, it's interesting where that's going. Well, you did mention behavioral health too. Again, I mean, that was one of those things, 20 years ago over 20 years ago when I first got medical education, I would say a lot of medical schools did not have an on-campus mental health just for the medical school. And fast forward it now, I would say most of them do. And even the ones that don't probably have some relationship, or they're part of some, larger university that has those resources. And, a lot of places will give them, say, the first 3 visits, kind of sort of a triage approach, and then they can kind of get them established, or refer them to get established with a long-term, therapist if they need things like cognitive behavioral therapy or DBT or any of those type of more prolonged services from a psychological type of thing. So, how do you think that that's affected medical education?
Positively, I think. I personally think that having that behavioral health specialist is certainly part of medical education now, right? It's become a norm, and that our students, they are resilient, but they do, in medical school, there is that little bit of, vulnerability with a student, and they don't know where to go and how to, and who to talk to. And I think having that behavioral health specialist, just to sort of tell them that they are supposed to be here, right? Imposter syndrome in medical school is absolutely true. There's no doubt about that. And our behavioral health specialist can help with that. But the other role of the behavioral health specialist to me is preventative, right? If every student that we had wanted to visit the behavioral health specialist, we wouldn't be able to do it on with the people that we have. So we have to think, how do we help the student on those side of things? How do we stop the student having to go to the behavioral health specialist, but they still get the support and the wellness support that they need? And that's about programming of wellness at the institution. It's not just about having a student organization or having the gym, which I know our students love. It's about what else is there, such as a workshop on imposter syndrome, right? Or how do we get them to do art therapy that takes them away from their day-to-day studying, just to give them something different. So I think that's what that's key to the behavioral health support that we need to provide, preventative as well as having a session, about an issue. You don't know what's going to happen to you. You may have a parent that passes away during medical school. How is that going to affect you? How do we support that through the behavioral health? And then, provide that ongoing support. But it's not about therapy and becoming the therapist for the student. It's about augmenting the services that could be provided outside, but helping them to cope with the crisis of right now. It's not about long term. It's about crisis management.
Yeah. It's an incredible resource, but also, of course, we have a mental health major challenge in America. Not only with the public, but also with medical students, right? It's incidence of anxiety and depression is really high levels. You mentioned imposter syndrome, which I'm sure there's probably some folks that haven't heard of imposter syndrome, but it's like having that feeling that they don't deserve to be there or belong there and stuff like that. And of course, we really we never take anybody to medical school that doesn't belong in medical school. So if they're here, they belong here. In fact, we have a sign in the student lounge that says you belong here for all of our students. But try to get them over that psychological challenges and false limiting beliefs and those type of things that kind of feed into that from a psychological standpoint.
And then that's going to help us in the long term, right? And I say it's, hey, you belong here, right? And I think that's extremely important to get that across to the student. You do belong here. You are capable, because we know you're capable. But we'll give you the support to some extent, but it also has to be a two-way thing, right? I can only take you so far. You have to meet me halfway with what you're trying to do here, and how your part in taking of how you support and look after yourself. And we can help them think about what they need to do. And that's through the behavioral health, and again through that learning specialist, that symbiotic relationship that those two areas of student services complement each other.
Yeah, absolutely. It all connects, right? And again, wellness is one of our core values here at OCOM. And, part of the reason why we have the on-campus mental health counselor, we have the learning specialists, we have the 24/7 access to telemental health, we have telepsychiatrists available, we have, even our curriculum, we actually, have a pass-fail curriculum with a ranked system, which not only helps them get into residency, but also is supposed to, equate to more of evidence-based psychosocial outcomes. And then, like you said, the facility, we have the student, the exercise facility, our fitness center. We have the, spiritual room, mother's room, things like that to, support the whole medical student.
Absolutely, all of those contribute to the wellness of the students here, because it touches people in different ways, right? There might be somebody that doesn't like going to the gym, but they are very spiritual, so they can go into the spiritual room. And we will have mothers. We don't have any yet, but we will, and that's going to happen. So how do we support those? Because it's not just a one track for a student. That everybody brings something different with them, right? And have different issues and concerns that they bring with them. Nobody is the same, so we have to be able to try and help the majority of our students with the support that we provide.
Yeah, I was reading something in Becker's, which is sort of this big hospitalist or hospital sort of newsletter, and they talk about different aspects of hospitals, which, obviously being, as the Dean of Medical School, we're so closely connected with our hospitals and hospital systems. But there was an interesting study. They actually showed that medical students have a higher amount of burnout than practicing physicians, which I was, kind of surprised when I saw that. But I guess that's, probably a lot of different reasons why that is, some of the societal things that we're seeing, and it's tough. It's tough to be a medical student.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Absolutely, it's tough to be. And that's why we're here, right, at Student Services, is to try and support that journey in medical school. How do we develop them to be great physicians, caring and competent physicians, right, part of our mission, but how do we get them to be leaders as well in not just as a physician when they go into residency and beyond that, but how do we get them back into leadership in the community? That's really important. So it shows their worth, right? So we start that right now to be able to help them in the future. Who's to say that the next there's a dean sitting in our inaugural class, right, that wants to be there, and that's providing them with the qualities that help them to develop as a leader, extremely important as well. So.
Yeah, sort of to the student affairs side, right? To me, I think, again, student services, especially with the role of student affairs, plays such an incredible, role in the development of a student, right? Because with student affairs, they help with all the student clubs, and we have 31 student clubs, which I still think is kind of crazy. The inaugural class, we had 97 students, we had 31 clubs that came out of this inaugural class, and I'm sure the next class, the incoming class, I'm sure that they'll probably want to have more student clubs and everything, but connecting them with physicians and experts in those fields and residency program directors, I think, plays an incredible role. And all the stuff from a service perspective, right? The student affairs, helps to connect them with, service opportunities. I know this past year we had over 1,000 hours of community service from our inaugural class of 97 students, which is more than 10 hours per student, right? And, I guarantee that the average physician in America probably, doesn't do more than 10 hours of community service in addition to their practice, right? It's tough, right? And the fact that our inaugural class did that during the first year, it goes to show you the incredible, desire of, folks going into medical school now that they want to serve. They really want to, contribute and do well. And they're doing all sorts of things, right? They, of course, we're here with Disney, and they have the Disney Marathon over there, and they're in the medical tent. And, most of the time it's heat exhaustion. You get the weekend warriors, but occasionally you get a cardiac arrest and things like that. You have, I know our inaugural class has started up this student-led free clinic that, they're actually, next month they're actually, starting to see patients in and everything, and that's part of, or with Shepherd's Hope, and and all the things that they do with one of the local children's hospitals, some service-related things, and I know that even they have a running club that raise stuff for, I think it was brain cancer or something like that. It's pretty incredible. But student affairs is plays a major role in that, and
I agree. I certainly agree with that. And I think the inaugural class are always that gung-ho, right? They want to do so much. And sometimes I feel that we're sort of holding them back a little bit because they would do a lot more, I'm sure, if we gave them the tools to do that. But I think, there has to be that balance, and that's what we try to get over to them. And I think they're a phenomenal group of people, the inaugural class. So always gung-ho and wanting to do things. And I'm excited to see what happens with Shepherd's Hope and that student-led free clinic and what more is out there for them. This year is going to be interesting, I have no doubt.
Well, we're so lucky to have you as the lead of the student services, Maddie. It's such a a pleasure and honor to work with you on an everyday basis. And thank you for coming on the OCOM podcast today.
Happy to do so. Thank you, Dr. Hasty.
Oh, thanks. Well, again, this is another episode of the OCOM Podcast, Modern Medical Education. Thank you for joining us today, and we'll see you again next time.